The following story is taken from the first chapter of the book Smithland by author Kyle Dorsey, now available for purchase on Amazon.com. For more information on the book Smithland or to purchase a copy, click the links in the video description below, if you dare.
Bob the Butcher by Kyle Dorsey. Narrated by Matt Grant. Recently, my girlfriend Brooklyn and I decided to move into our first house. It was a small house with one bedroom and one bathroom, but for our first house, it would suffice. The neighborhood we moved to was far off from the city we both grew up in. We both had this strong interest for nature and travel. So we moved to a small town called Smithland, which is buried in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The residents of this small town seem friendly, but are very quiet and keep to themselves. Even the real estate woman, whom you'd expect to be bubbly and cheerful, was extremely quiet, with what appeared to be a fearful expression on her face. We decided to pass it off and assume that she was just a shy person. After about a month, we had finally settled in and began restoration on the house. We mainly did yard work, being that we didn't really have the money for any major restorations. One day, while cleaning weeds out of the garden, I happened upon a manhole cover. I found this a bit strange considering the location of the house. It seemed like there should be no access to the sewer from here. Curious, I retrieved a crowbar from the shed and pried open the cover. I peered inside, only to find total darkness and a few rungs at the beginning of a ladder. I continued down, my interest piqued at the thought of what I might find. I felt my foot hit the ground as I reached the end of the ladder. I fumbled through my pockets for a lighter, flicked the top, and began inspecting the room. Each wall was decorated with a vast assortment of knives. In the middle of the room sat a desk with a sharpener and a clown mask atop it. The mask was different from other masks I'd seen in many ways. The texture had me curious as to what it might be made out of. To hold the mask in place, 2 leather straps ran along the back and connected to the sides. I placed the mask back onto the desk and continued my inspection. At the side of the desk sat a large box which was covered in dust. I swiped the dust away with my fingertips and drew the flaps away from the box. Inside, I found an old film projector and 1 reel of film. I thought to myself, what kind of past this house must have and what clues the film might provide. And I decided to retrieve it, bringing it into the house. I drew the shades and dimmed the lights, then started the projector and began the film. The film was grainy, but based on the attire and apparel of the people in the film, this must have been recorded around the 90s. It appeared to be a child's birthday. In the film, a man and a woman were shown smiling and holding each other while watching as whom I could only assume were their child and friends were being entertained by a clown. The makeup the clown wore had strikingly similar designs to the mask that I had found. The film cut out and I began to rise from my chair. Suddenly and unexpectedly, the film recollected and continued on. In this part of the film, only the woman was shown. She didn't smile this time. She only stared blankly as her son and what appeared to be only half of the children from the original section of the film were entertained by the same clown. Suddenly, the group turned toward the camera, staring at something behind it with looks of fear and loathing. A man stepped on camera who had similar characteristics to the man in the first film, but somehow different. This time, darkness and evil radiated off of him. His muscles were toned in an almost sickly manner. I watched as the children ran over to the mother as he screamed and shouted at the group. I could see the mother weep and mouth what appeared to be, "Robert, no!" This appeared to enrage him in an almost terrifying manner. He screamed and flipped a table, almost flinging it across the yard. Next, he approached the clown, grabbing him by the throat and flinging him to the ground. He removed a marker from his pocket and then started drawing lines along the outer parts of his face. Then, he removed a sharp knife from his pocket, slowly and steadily began cutting through the flesh like paper. I wondered what I found more disturbing, the act or how precise his cuts were. The man stopped. He rose slowly and turned around. I vomited as I saw his face, for now I knew what the mask I had found was made from. The man stood facing the group. The clown's face stretched over his like a mask. He gazed for a few moments at them with a sadistic look in his eyes. Bob, I've decided to call him Bob, marked his final atrocious act in the film by drawing a gun from his waist, and then shot each of the guests dead, one by one. I vomited once more as the film cut out. I was shocked not only by what I had seen, but also upon the realization that it had happened in my own backyard. I decided not to tell Brooklyn. I couldn't corrupt this house for her as the film had for me. Hours had passed, and the visions of what I had seen had still not left my mind. I had finished my work and gone to bed, completely restless. Brooklyn returned home and found me awake. She had been putting in extra hours at work, which had caused her to return later at night. "Why are you still awake, hon?" she asked, confused. All that I could do was kiss her head as she crawled into bed with me, and pray that holding my love in my arms would comfort me. It was 3 a.m. I hadn't slept at all. Brooklyn was sound asleep. God, how I envied her. I rose out of bed and looked out the window. Raindrops were heavily falling and lightning flashed across the sky. A storm had rolled in about a half an hour ago. I walked through the window and watched the raindrops fall, splashing against the concrete streets in waves. I felt myself finally relax as I listened to the sound of the rain patter against the window. I let my eyes sink at the thought that I might finally get some rest tonight. My heart stopped as my eyes reached street level. There, on the other side of the street, stood the dark figure of a man looking back at me. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was him by the same chill he gave me when I saw the film. I stared for what felt like hours, until I saw him draw something silver from his waist. I squinted to get a better look. It was a gun. Before I had time to react, I heard a loud bang followed by an echo, and I saw the flash in the chamber of the gun. I winced, waiting for the bullet to make impact, but it never did. It was a blank. He was toying with me. I looked back at the street only to find that he was gone. I crawled into bed and wrapped my arms around Brooklyn, fearful for both of our lives. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Brooklyn cooking breakfast in the kitchen. I looked at the clock. It was 8 a.m. I hadn't fallen asleep until 5 a.m. I'd have to go through the day on only 3 hours of rest. I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled down the hallway, still trying to wake up. I made it to the kitchen where I sat down, hazily rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and tried to greet Brooklyn with a smile. Her face remained emotionless. Concern radiated from her as she made her way around the kitchen. She scraped the eggs she had been cooking onto my plate, then sat down next to me, staring at me with a stern yet worrisome expression. "What happened last night, Daniel?" she asked with a choke in her voice. "What do you mean?" I asked as innocently as I could. "You were still awake when I got home. You were pale as a ghost. You hardly slept. You looked terrified. You still do." Her eyes watered as she spoke. She was pained. I felt guilty keeping such a dark secret from such a sweet girl. "It's nothing. I'm just not settled in yet. All the new people, the new sights, this house. I'll be okay. I promise." I prayed that she wouldn't see through my lie. I couldn't have her as terrified as I am, not after she'd been so happy since we moved here. "Okay. If you need to talk, you know I'm always here, babe." She pressed her soft lips against my cheek and then walked away. I sighed, both in relief and discontent, at how I couldn't convince myself to tell her what I knew. I finished my breakfast and went to the yard to continue restoration on the house while Brooklyn left for work. I spent the entire day drowning in paranoia, always watching over my shoulder, knowing he was somewhere nearby. I'd watch carefully as I mowed the lawn, raked the leaves, and continued removing weeds from the yard, wondering where he could be hiding. I spent hours working out in the hot sun. As soon as I'd finish one project, I'd start on the next. I needed anything that could keep me active and alert with a good eye on my surroundings. That way, no matter what his next move was, at least I'd see him coming. By the time Brooklyn had returned home, I was exhausted. My arms, neck, and face were beet red and burnt from the sun. I could hardly walk. She helped me to the bedroom, and we both went to bed. I laid awake waiting for her to fall asleep, waiting for a chance to go back to guard duty to see if I could scope out Bob the butcher. My night's work turned out fruitless, and I spent the next few days with the same routine. I'd get between 2 and 3 hours of sleep each night after keeping watch. I took his lack of activity as a sign that he was gone, and I thought to myself, if he wanted to harm us, he would have surely done it by now. After the first couple of days, I started feeling the toll my paranoia had put on my mind. I had begun losing touch with the world around me, and nothing made sense anymore. I heard voices that came from nowhere. I saw shadows that weren't there. I needed to see a doctor, but I convinced myself that I just needed rest. It had been 2 weeks with no signs of Bob the Butcher. I had made a full recovery, and I could finally hold Brooklyn and feel comfort again. One night after finishing my hard work, I decided to relax with some TV. Brooklyn was at work, so I was home alone again. The show I was watching was some documentary about the world's worst serial killers. I thought to myself, they can't even compare to Bob, and found myself laughing, feeling that it was all behind me. I also thought to myself about whether or not the history of our house was the reason so many of our neighbors had kept to themselves. I looked out the window. Lightning flashed across the sky and thunder shook the house. Then, I heard the loud click as the power cut out. Before my encounter, I used to always enjoy storms like this. I did my best to remain calm, but a thought grew in my mind that reminded me that if he was still here, without television, without radio, without anything to distract me, it would be just he and I. I rushed to the front door and locked it, though this was not enough to make me feel secure. I hurried to the kitchen to grab the biggest knife I could find, and then sat tensely at the kitchen table. I sat for hours, the storm not dying down, and I had fallen asleep. My eyes creaked open about 4 hours later, and I looked at the clock. 11:53 p.m. Brooklyn should have been home by now. Before I had the chance to rise up from the table to see if she was home, I heard a sound that made my heart race and sent a chill down my spine. It was the sound of something sharp and metallic being driven across the side of the house, almost as if someone was cutting it with a knife. It ran the course of the house, beginning from the back and tracing to the front door, where it stopped. For at least 30 seconds, there was dead silence. Then, there were 3 slow, light knocks. I rose up from the table slowly, bracing the knife in my hand for attack. The knocks repeated, growing louder each time, as if whoever was on the other side of the door was losing their patience. There was one final loud thud, then a crash. Whoever was there broke through the door. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, approaching the kitchen. Terrified, I ran around the house, looking for another outlet, scurrying about like a trapped rat. I dashed through the doorway to the living room, only to be struck abruptly by a heavy, brick-like fist. Large enough to make an impact from the top of my skull to the tip of my chin. I fell back in a daze and looked up at my attacker. Lightning flashed, revealing his painted, grinning face. He wore a ragged tank top, old, worn-out jeans, the clown mask from the bunker, and the same twisted look he had in the film. In his hand, he held a disembodied head, which was still dripping with blood. Whose? I could not tell. Or at least not until he rolled it to me. He swung one arm up, flinging the head towards me lightly, sending it bouncing, and then rolling to my side. It stopped with the eye staring directly into mine. It was Brooklyn. She held a disturbed, pained look on her face, the same she may have held in her passing. I choked, nearly starting to cry at the sight of my lost love. Then looked back at him. He stood there, looking into my eyes with a vulgar presence of evil. And finally spoke with a thick, gravelly voice.
You should have told her.
He was right. If I'd only told her, she might still be alive. It had been my fault. Before I could have a second thought, he kicked me flat to the ground, stepping on my chest so that I couldn't move. He leaned in close to my face, breathing heavily, and then with a chilling voice spoke.
You were the lucky one. You knew that I was coming for you. Next time, you won't be as fortunate.
He took the same knife that I had seen in the film from a holster that was strapped to his waist, then grabbed me tightly by the throat, strangling me and forcing my tongue out of my mouth. With one clean swipe by the blade, my tongue flew from my mouth, flopping to the ground. Blood oozed out like a waterfall, and I screamed at the intense pain that I felt. He leaned in close again.
You won't be able to yell for help,
he said, then threw the knife to the side. Next, he drew out two smaller flat-handled knives, which he placed between his fingers as he made a fist. He struck my face with the force of a speeding car, the blades piercing my eyes.
You won't be able to see me coming,
I could hear him say. I choked on my own blood, vomiting back up the amount that I had swallowed. I couldn't see, but I knew he was still there. He leaned forward. I could feel his breath circulating throughout my ear.
You won't be able to hear me coming,
he said, before jamming what felt like two metal rods into my ears, rupturing both of my eardrums. I lay there, praying that he would finish me off, only to feel discontent as I felt the vibrations of his footsteps going away from heavy to light. He was leaving. I groaned, knowing that my pain was not over. Now, I lay here in a puddle of my own blood. I can hardly move. But I tell myself, if I can just find Brooklyn's body, I can fix her. I stumble, trying to balance myself as I pull up off the floor. All that I need to do is find her body. I can fix her. Things will be normal again. I will hold her again.
Bob the Butcher
is taken from the first chapter of the book Smithland by author Kyle Dorsey, now available for purchase on Amazon.com. For more information on the book Smithland or to purchase a copy, click the links in the video description below if you dare.